Then there's the eating part, like trying to find time to make food.
All right, looks like we're live.
We're live. Yeah. Okay, we'll call this meeting to order. Good afternoon, everybody. This is Thursday, May 7th, 4 o'clock, the Board of Health meeting. Just a reminder out there, under the current state of health emergency, pursuant to the Governor Baker's March 12, 2020 order regarding open meeting laws, these meetings have been provided provisions to be done remotely. So they are videotaped and done by audio. That being said, we're here to review this next phase of the phase 2 of the construction and landscaping, and hopefully get through this and make any kind of minor changes. For participation purposes, we'll do a roll call participation. So if you could say whether you're here or not, so when I call your name. Ab?
Yes.
James Cooper.
Here.
Colleen Weld.
Here.
Rita Higgins.
Here.
We also have Jeff Carlson from Natural Resources. Greg Corbo from Town Council. Paul Murphy from Plus.
Here.
Leslie Snell from Plus.
Here.
Okay. Do we need Roberto? You want to start with anything, or?
Actually, Mr. Chair, would you mind if I kick things off?
Sure.
Thank you. First of all, I would like to apologize to everyone for being so late in circulating the new drafts that I promised. I got caught up in another matter this morning that I just could not manage to pull myself away from. So please accept my apologies. There was no intent to try to not get you this on time or prevent you from being able to see it. And hopefully we'll be able to finalize things as we go on. What I would suggest, if everybody has it in front of them, I would suggest that we work off of the draft that Leslie sent around, which was in response to the one that I sent earlier today.
I haven't seen that.
If you haven't seen it, it should be in your inbox right now.
Okay.
And for those who have it, if it comes up on your screen in red line, I would suggest just changing the view to no markup so that we can just look at what we have and go from there.
If it makes it easier for everyone, I can share the screen here so that we can follow it on the screen.
Oh, maybe that would be a good idea.
Rita?
Yeah, I was just going to ask at least to confirm that we're all looking at the same document. And then Steve, if you want it back to all of us, that would be great.
Okay. So Roberto, you have the one that Leslie sent? And Leslie and Paul, I know you said that Plus might have additional comments, so we could talk about those as we go along, and see if we can get this just finalized today. And so, just by way of background, I didn't make a whole lot of changes beyond the draft that we were looking at yesterday, other than to incorporate the few things that we talked about, and then trying to make for a simpler document, I separated out the definition of allowable construction from the guidelines that all construction sites have to comply with when they go back. Guidelines have been in place throughout this process and, should remain in place, regardless of, how much you decide to open construction up. And, certainly we can go through elements of those guidelines to see if they still apply. But I guess the first question I would ask is everybody satisfied with this framework of having two separate documents?
Yeah, I'm fine with that.
Okay.
Me too.
Yes.
Okay. All right. So then, as we go forward, the first section is just a restatement of the purpose. The second paragraph, obviously, we'll have to fill in the date. And as of that date, any allowable construction defined below may resume, subject to the condition that there shall be no more than 8 workers on a job site at any one time, and that they comply with the terms of the Nantucket construction guideline rules for getting back to work. So that's the second document. All other construction is prohibited until further order of the board. So then we define what is allowable construction. So the first thing is, and I think that this paragraph is really the only significant change from the prior orders. Rather than having that list of types of projects that had been started that are allowed to continue, now we just have all unfinished construction, which means any work for which a building permit or certificate of appropriateness by the Historic District Commission was issued and work actually commenced prior to March 20th, 2020, and which was stopped. So, this covers everything that had a building permit, regardless of the type of work that it is, subject only to complying with the guidelines and complying with any limitations in the governor's order, depending on how the building commissioner chooses to interpret that. So are there any questions about this?
I have a question.
Sure.
Where the first line says unfinished construction, which shall mean any work, but when you say unfinished construction, you mean physical construction that has started?
I guess I would defer to Plus on that one. But yeah, my understanding is that if you had a building permit prior to March 20th, 2020,
right,
you can now go back to work.
Right. Okay, fine. Thank you.
Moving on then, the remaining paragraphs are carryovers from the prior orders. So we define in paragraph 2, we define what a job site is. And I don't think that there's much has changed with respect to that. In paragraph 3, we carry over emergency repairs. So this would cover a circumstance where you didn't have a permit prior to March 20th, but you have to do work due to circumstances beyond your control. Paragraph 4 is the work that was previously authorized under emergency order number 1. Paragraph 5 was the work previously authorized under emergency order number 5, except that for single worker registration form is no longer going to be required. So I believe that, and this is one of the changes that Plus just did. So I believe that before, under order number 5, if you were a single worker, you had to register with the building department. And this suggestion would be that you no longer have to do that, that if you're a single worker, you can just go back to work. Okay, so, and then in number 6, we have any work, including work pursuant to the issuance of a building permit issued after March 20th for dwelling units or a building that contains dwelling units subject to a deed restriction limiting ownership or rental to households earning 150% or less of area median income. So this is to account for the covenant housing that we discussed yesterday. So before we move on, there are a couple of things from the version that I had worked on that I would just like to have some discussion on. If I could find that. Okay, so under so all right, under allowable construction, in the version that I circulated earlier, under number 4, where it says work previously authorized under supplemental order number 1, I had listed that work out. And the reason that I did that was for purposes of responding to comments yesterday that people didn't want to have to go back and forth amongst these various orders to try to figure out what they're allowed to do and what they're not. And I see that Plus is suggesting that those bullets be taken out. And I was just wondering whether there is any discussion about that.
Rita?
I was wondering about that. I thought that was really helpful. I like how clean this document is and easy to read, but I think that I think in one of the emails, Leslie, you mentioned in Exhibit A, I don't know what that was in reference to, but I would think of it as something like that, where it's an asterisk or an exhibit or something, so that if people have a question about it, it's right here in front of them. They don't have to look it up. But I think keeping this simple does make it more clear, which is one of our objectives, regardless of the content. So I think having it as an attachment to this would be key.
Any other comments?
So I can explain what the Exhibit A is. So when the governor issued his executive order defining the types of essential services that could be permitted to continue, he had an Exhibit A to his order, which defined those particular services. And I believe that the order was originally issued on March 13th, and then it was subsequently amended. And in the amended Exhibit A, the governor specifically spelled out the categories of construction that would be allowed to continue as essential services. And what we discussed, and I did, by the way, just try to send out around a link to the Exhibit A, which some of you may or may not have by this point. But so the center of the discussion has been, well, what is the extent of construction that is allowed by the governor? I think the position of the building community is that the governor allows all construction as an essential service. I don't necessarily agree with that, but ultimately it's up to the building commissioner to interpret that order and apply it as he sees fit.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with that, with leaving that up to Paul to interpret moving forward. Rita?
I don't know that I would agree that, I mean, again, this is open to interpretation, but I would tend to think, to Greg's point yesterday, that if it was open to all construction, then there wouldn't be a need for it to call out safety, sanitation, and essential operations. So I don't think it is applying to all construction, but it sounds like the interpretation is up to the building commissioner, or I don't know if it's up to this board, but at least up to the building commissioner. But I wouldn't take it to mean all construction myself.
So I guess we could take these issues one at a time. I guess the first question is, do you want to list the bullet points that were copied out of the prior orders? Or do you just want to leave it as work authorized under supplement to emergency order number 1?
Anybody?
Can you see me?
Yeah.
All right. I think it's fine the way it is. I'm all for making it simple.
Yeah, I would agree.
I feel the same.
Yeah, I feel the same way.
Rita?
I think this format should stay, but I do think that the emergency order should, or those bullet points should be attached as an addendum.
I agree.
Come. Yeah. Did I hear you say you would agree with it being attached as an addendum?
Excuse me. Yes, I said that would be what I would prefer.
Okay. I don't have any problems with it being attached.
Okay, so then I'm going to add to paragraph 4 as described in an addendum here too.
Right.
Okay. All right. So then moving on, the second issue that we were just discussing is, should this order make specific reference to the governor's Exhibit A or not?
Jim?
I say no.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if we have to leave that in there. It's confusing enough. Malcolm and Helene?
Yeah, I don't think we need it.
Okay.
Okay, so then with regard to this,
One
I'm sorry.
quick question. I just wanted to ask if Roberto had an opinion on that one.
I think a reference to Exhibit A is not a bad idea just because we know where it's coming from. But if the board thinks that that's inherent in this, then that's the board's decision. I like the idea of having it attached as a appendix, though.
Rita?
I personally like to have it attached because I get a lot of questions about what's allowed, and it's really nice to be able to point people in the direction. It's right here in their hand when you have to get people going to all sorts of different links and websites. I think keeping this clean and clear so you can read through it quickly is one thing, but having as much information as people want easily accessible is key. Not everyone's going to read it, not everyone's going to care, but I think that when it's buried on a website, the people who want it aren't going to see it. So I would agree with Roberto, but again. It's up to the board.
Roberta?
I do have one observation about that. If we are going to be allowing, if basically falling back on Exhibit A, should we not just lift order number 5 and go back to the state?
Rita?
I think that is the question, really. To me, there's two things to loosen here. There's the what work it applies to and how that's interpreted, and then how many people are allowed on a job site. So I don't know that just because one is loosened, the other's loosened, but I think going back to the state is one option. I'm going to be the one, maybe the only one, that errs on the side of precaution. I think we've made great headway. And I think loosening them both, you know, I don't know. We don't know what will happen, but I'd err on the side of precaution. But I also defer to Roberto. So if, Roberto, you think loosening up on both is the way to go, then again, at this stage, you're our expert.
I would say no, let's not loosen up as much as we are. But I think the only thing that is here that would be different than anything else is the number of people on a site. Everything else is exactly the same as the governor's order.
Actually, if I could just jump in, that's not exactly the case. You are still, if you adopt this,
okay,
you are still being more strict than the governor's order, because you're not allowing new construction unless it fits into one of the emergency categories.
Got it. Okay.
So there are really two ways that you're being more strict. You're limiting the number of people that can be on a site, and you're limiting it to only work that had a permit prior to the commencement of the emergency.
How about if we leave it as attached? And the simple thing would be, if there's, for anybody that has any questions, I'm not going to try to interpret it. So it's the questions would be towards Paul, and he can explain it to people or decide that's what he's there for. If that keeps everybody happy with leaving it attached in reference to the governor's orders.
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, yeah. So I would say, see you smiling there, but let's leave it at that, and we'll have move on to this, one of the next thing with the number of people. Isn't that what we're doing next?
I'm sorry, I just wasn't entirely clear on what we decided. So on the draft that I had sent around, paragraph 7 said this order is subject to the additional condition that the work must be included as an essential service as defined in Exhibit A to the governor's executive order number 21. And Plus is suggesting that language be stricken. So the first question is, do you want that language in there or not? And then I guess a subset of that is, if it stays in, do you attach a copy of the governor's Exhibit A? Or do we just forget about the reference to the governor altogether and leave it to the building commissioner to use his judgment? He knows about the governor's Exhibit A. He's the one who's processing these applications, and he's going to have to decide on a case-by-case basis, whether the work qualifies.
I'd just like to ask Leslie or Paul just their reasoning for striking the language.
Are they on? Because I can't see them from my end.
I can't see anyone, but I'm going to defer to Paul on this. But I will say we think it's unnecessary. Obviously, we have to follow the governor's orders, and it's up to the building commissioner to determine what those are in reference to the application. So we think it's clearer to take it out. He knows what he has to do, but he can comment more on this if necessary.
You there, Paul?
Yeah. Sorry, I had to unmute. Can you guys hear me? Obviously
Yeah.
now. Okay, thanks. I'm in favor of striking it because my contacts throughout the building officials community are not interpreting the order are not cherry picking construction out of the governor's order, including Martha's Vineyard. They're allowing everything to continue. And so I think what makes the most sense is I think Nantucket should follow what the rest of the Commonwealth is doing. I don't see any reason not to. And I think keeping that in is going to lead to confusion for people in the community. There's going to be, discontent over interpretations. And right now, the Commonwealth of Massachusetts is moving forward, and calling all construction essential. And I'd like to stick with that. That works best.
Okay, so now after I'm hearing that, how about can somebody give me a motion whether to leave this in or to strike it, remove it? Jim?
I make a motion that we strike it.
Okay, can I get a second?
Guess not.
Did you guys all hear? Malcolm, Helene, did you?
Yeah, I know. I did hear. Does Roberto have an opinion on this? I mean, again, we're getting down to, the purpose of our board, which is health and safety. So,
Yes, the purpose of our board is to maintain this health and safety. We are trying to get things to stay as strict as possible, and if we leave it in, it does reach that strictness. But Paul alludes to a good point about how interpretation is a big issue, and I think it's at this point what the board wants. I would like to see it stay in, but I think if the board wants to take it out, and I think it's just there are more important things in here that I see. So I think the no new construction part that Greg brings up, that's a good point. I actually didn't realize that. The amount of workers on here is another part. As I think we should leave at least some sort of a reference, the attachment of Exhibit A, but the interpretation is going to be the biggest portion of it, and I think that's it.
So I'm hearing the discussion. On the one hand, we're trying to keep this as simple as possible, and on the other hand, the building commissioner has given his interpretation, and the buck is ultimately going to stop with him, whether you put this statement in there or not. His judgment is going to be the same, and so if it makes his job easier to not have it there, and it causes less confusion in the community, my recommendation would be to leave it out.
Sorry, it's really hard now to see. I know, Steve, you're probably trying to monitor this. It's kind of hard to see people. I would say for the sake of clarity, and if the building commissioner feels that leaving it in there would undermine his ability to interpret the way he needs to interpret it, then for the sake of clarity, we can leave it out. And it is obviously available elsewhere for people to read who do want to read it. I think providing people as much information as possible, but if it undermines or constricts the building commissioner's ability to interpret things the way he'd like to interpret them, then I would make a motion to strike it.
Okay.
okay, I'll second it.
Okay, by roll call vote. whether to strike. Rita,
Yes.
Yes.
James,
Yes, strike it.
Mike, is Malcolm there?
Yes, I'm here. I've been waving my hand, but no.
Oh, I can't see you with this other stuff up.
I mean,
And okay, so
I want to make a quick comment. I think this is we're kind of circling around here, and this is like arguing about the number of angels on the head of a pin. I think the reality is the two important things in this is the limitation of workers and new construction. That's the only difference here. So let's just get on with that, and I will support whatever the board wants on this issue.
Right. So striking the motion of striking that verbiage. I didn't hear what you said. Yes or no?
Yes, 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 yes.
And chairman says aye. So we'll leave that part out. It's getting to the point where it's paralysis by analysis, and I'm sure we're all getting when these orders go in, and there's an intricate part of this community, and everybody who has my cell phone and email, I even know what people call all the time. I'm sure Jimmy too, all of you, and we can't. It's frustrating. It's not for us to interpret. Paul knows all about it, and he's the guy to do it. So, if somebody wants to look up the governor's thing, it's readily accessible.
I don't know, since no one can see me.
No, I can see you.
All right. Can you hear me?
I can hear you now.
Yeah, I agree. I think we're spending a lot of time on formalities, and I hate to use this word again, legalese. The point is, we're talking about 8 people and no new construction. And I think those are the two issues we have to agree on or not agree on, and how the document is constructed. As long as it's as simple as possible, we should move on.
Okay. Rita?
Yeah, I just want to say quickly, that was my fault because I'm fielding a lot of questions as well, figuring out how to get the information to people in a way that's digestible. And so, again, I apologize if that was derailing or going down. I think it was an important point, and I appreciate the discussion, but I agree that there's other points to look at as well.
Yes.
And if the building commissioner and Leslie feel that it's not necessary, it was helpful to hear their reasoning.
Right. Again, I'm speaking the simplification. I'll be very brief so we can move on. As you know, when we develop a drug and have a package insert, the package insert no one can read. So what's being done now is there's a very simple, easy to read, simplified version of that. And when we're all done with this, and let's move on, I think if we just write a 1-page summary with bullet points, this is what you can do, this is what you can't do, and move on. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
I agree.
Okay, Greg, you want to?
Okay, so I think the next issue that we should discuss is the second document, which lists the guidelines, and I just want confirmation that everybody is satisfied with the guidelines for conducting construction. I believe that the only change that was made was to allow 2 people per truck, consistent with the guidelines for landscaping. I guess the first question I have, and maybe Roberto, can you pull this one up?
Give me a second. I'm going to need to stop sharing for a little bit so that people don't.
Okay, sure.
Yeah.
So I can keep talking. The first section of this talks about an application procedure, and I'm just wondering whether, in light of where we are at this point, whether we need that anymore. And I guess this question is really directed at Leslie and/or Paul.
And Sambo, one of you guys want to take that?
I can't see Paul, so I don't know if he's trying to talk or not. I would be supportive of removing the application procedure. I mean, it's pretty labor intensive, I guess, to track all of that and produce charts and whatever. I mean, at this point, any construction that's taking place would be subject to the COVID-19 guidelines, unless it's a single worker. So I don't know why we would need to continue to track that. And if I can just add, I know on the vineyard, we were looking up what they are doing today, and they are no longer requiring registration. At least that was my understanding.
Okay. And I would tend to agree with that. I mean, I think it was necessary before because some projects with building permits were allowed to go forward and others weren't. I think once we move to the point of saying that all projects with building permits can go forward, there's no reason to have a separate application procedure because they already have a permit. They're still subject to these regulations and enforcement if they're not complying. But I don't see the need to have an extra layer of permitting for something that's already permitted.
I would agree myself. Anybody else? Jim?
Well, I think we're nitpicking this thing to death. You know what? I think Malcolm is right. You know, we'll end up having another meeting before we get through with this thing today. I think we have two simple things we have to do, and the number of people on the job, and the other thing we did, we settled. So I think we're just dragging this thing out to death. We need to end this thing now because now we're going to have to wait and get another piece of paper here to read before we give it to the Board of Health. I mean, before we give it to the Select Board. I mean, let's get this thing over with. You know, all this stuff is repetitious till I'm getting sick of looking at paper here. Let's just move this thing on and get it over with.
Yeah, so we don't need the additional, the permits. It's just rhetoric and a lot more work for everybody.
Do you want a motion on that, Steve?
Sure.
Okay, I'm so moved.
Can I get a second?
Second.
All in favor by roll call to remove that? Rita?
Yes. Yeah.
James?
Yes.
Helene?
Yes.
Malcolm?
Yes.
And Chair says yes.
Okay, so Roberta, will you delete that section?
Just to confirm, the section that I have highlighted so I don't burn off everything else by accident.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Malcolm?
I just want to make one comment and let's move on. I've heard a lot about in the past couple of days that this community is doing that, Martha's Vineyard doing that. I don't want to hear that anymore. I want to know what is the best for the island, not what some place else is doing. And I will stop because, like my friend James, I think we just need to get going and get this done.
Okay, thanks. Yeah.
Okay, so then with regard to the construction procedures, the only other thing that I changed from the prior version that was in order number 5, which you've already adopted, is that I changed no more than one person to no more than 2 people shall be in a vehicle at one time. Which I understand there was consensus on from the meeting yesterday. Does anybody have any other comments or requested changes to the construction procedures?
No, I think the next thing will be to just decide number of people.
So, okay, let's go back to that then. That's in document number 1. Okay, and the second paragraph, yep. So there are 2 things that we need to decide here. The first is when this is going to go into effect, and the second is how many workers can be on a job site.
Anybody want to start with what the feeling is with first the number of people on the job site?
How long will it take to get this translated into what the 3 languages you were doing, Spanish, Portuguese, and Bulgarian?
Roberto?
It'll take a few days. I think to be fair and safe, we should probably give our translator until at least Monday.
Mhm.
As far as so you're thinking of date start, how many would be, you think the 11th, which would be Monday?
As long as we can get it translated and documented and available to people, Monday sounds reasonable to me, but
Jim?
Yeah, let's do it and get it going for Monday. Let's talk about how many people we want on the job.
So
I'm going to start, and I'm going to say in the construction, I think we should have 4 people on the job, and unless there's a need to have anyone else, if they're doing work that certain people can't do and they need a couple of people more, I will agree to that. And I think that's where I am. Doesn't mean I won't agree to if the rest of the people are with it, but that's what I'm thinking right now.
should that be decided by the building commissioner on a case-by-case basis?
For the people, I would say yes.
Okay.
Welcome. Any thoughts?
Well, I want to make this simple. And by going to the building commissioner, that makes it a little more complex. But I will go with the board because I think whether it's 5 or 6 or 8 or 4, it's, who knows what the right number is. 4, fine.
It's a matter of safety too, basically. You're talking about construction and lifting walls.
Well, if that's why in some ways I would be comfortable leaving with the number of 8. It's really up to me how Paul wants to deal with this.
Yeah, I mean, how about as the saying goes, where we were just turning the dial up a little bit and phasing things in, we make it at 6, and then anybody that needs more than that, job dependent, can talk to Paul.
Sounds good to me.
Fine.
Would you be good with that, Jim?
How many? 6? Did you say 6?
Yes.
All right, fine. I'll make that motion then.
Okay.
I'll make a motion
does
6 people.
Hang on for a second. I can't see Rita. I just don't want to think her.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. I know this is tricky. I was gonna say I'm gonna stick with 4. I understand the reasoning for 6, and I also understand the that there's more to go back to Paul for exceptions either way. But I would stick with 4. I like loosening it on one side, not both. But I'm obviously fine with where the board is headed.
Okay, so Roberto, can we talk about revised language here before there's a motion? So we're going to change 8 to 6. And then after one time, we're going to add the words, unless a greater number is approved by the building commissioner.
Perfect.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, we good.
Okay.
So back to the motion that was made. Can I get a second on the adding to 6?
Second.
Okay, by roll call vote, James Cooper,
Yes.
Rita Higgins,
No, for reasons stated.
Colleen Weld,
Yes.
Malcolm McNabb. Yeah, you're muted. You now go.
I'm sorry for my inconsistency, but I'm going to support Rita on this 4 and then permission to go farther.
Okay, well, chairman says 6, so that's majority vote. We're going to go to 6 with applying for anything else if you need more people for Paul.
Okay. Roberto, just a really small thing. In that same paragraph, after the word guidelines, can you add the word and? Okay. And so with that being said, I believe that we're ready for a vote on these 2 documents unless anybody has other comments, questions, or concerns to discuss.
Mr. Chair or Chairman?
Yeah, Leslie.
I don't think we necessarily need to go through this, but there are some changes that will need to be made in the construction safety stand down to reflect the changes that you all have made relative to the application process being removed and that sort of thing. Very technical, administrative type changes.
Okay.
Do you want to go through those now?
So I think I could probably qualify the motion to allow staff and town council to make non-substantive administrative changes for purposes of consistency.
Okay, that's
okay.
Is that fine? Yes, I think so, Leslie. Yeah, does that work? Yeah.
Yes, that's perfect.
Okay. Okay, is there anything else?
Anything else? Any other comments? I can't see Rita. So, well,
yeah.
Okay, so Mr. Chair, I would recommend the following motion if anyone is so inclined. I move that the board vote to approve Executive Order number 8 as shown on the screen and discussed at this meeting, and the Nantucket construction guidelines and rules for getting back to work, provided that staff may work with town council to make non-substantive administrative changes for purposes of consistency.
Can I ask a question? I'm sorry, Steve, I know you can't see me. Greg, as a matter of order, if I have voted no on one of the items, but am agreeing with the other parts, do I vote no for accepting the entire document?
I would recommend that you vote one way or the other on the entire document. Your position on the number of workers has been noted and your vote is recorded. It's now part of the document. And so unless you're not willing to support the document at all, I would recommend that you vote on the whole thing.
Okay, thank you.
So could I get a motion on how okay, Malcolm first.
So, Mr. Chair, just for order, someone should say so moved if they're inclined.
That's what I was waiting for.
Okay.
So moved.
Thank you. And someone should second.
Second.
Is there any further discussion?
Malcolm, you were muted when you were trying to say something.
At some point in this motion or a separate motion, we should make sure that we authorize the chair to sign the document in our behalf, so we don't have to have another meeting.
Jim, will you accept that as an amendment?
I will accept that. Yes.
Okay. Okay, so we have a motion and a second. Any other discussion?
Any other discussion? Okay, by roll call vote, James Cooper,
Yes.
Malcolm McNabb,
Yes.
Rita Higgins,
Yes, with an asterisk.
Did I get you, Ellie?
Yes.
Okay. And Sharon says yes. So phase 2 is enacted and going into effect on May 11th.
So Roberto, just for administrative purposes, will you accept all changes in this document we just worked on? And this will now become the operative document until we fix up those administrative issues.
Sounds good. I'll accept all of them. I'll save it and then I'll send it over to you.
Okay, great. Okay, so construction phase 2 is complete. Now we can move on to landscape phase 2. So I guess I'm not aware of any substantive changes that need to be made or discussed at this point. It appeared from yesterday that there was consensus that the current landscape phase 2 was fine the way that it was.
Anybody have, that's how it seemed to be, unless somebody wanted to pick up something that wasn't right by reading this meeting.
That includes the change from 1 person to 2 in the truck, right?
Yeah, I think that's in there.
Okay.
Yes, sir. That's in there.
All right.
Jeff, do you have any concerns or anything that you wanted to share? Or?
No, I think I felt comfortable with the document as submitted, but thank you for asking.
Yeah.
So the one thing that I would ask is whether there's any reason to have the procedures in the landscape document, or if they're just the same as the procedures in the construction document, in which case we could take all of that out of this and just refer to the guidance for construction.
Yeah, I'm not sure if, I think there are some differences in there, isn't there, in the protocols?
I'll be honest, I haven't, picked through the construction one as much as this one. I have to look. I can't think of any right off the top of my head. But if you give me a second, I'll try to take a look and see if I can spot anything.
I don't think
so.
Well,
so before we go through that exercise, I mean, what is the feeling of the members of the board? I mean, I think that we could have a motion that authorizes town council and staff to work on marrying the construction and landscape guidelines into a single document, and then that would allow you to move forward with a vote now, or we could just simply leave this document the way that it is.
Steve, could we, no, I was going to say take that off, but actually, I just am wondering what is the benefit to marrying the two? I feel like there's not, as a landscaper, I'm going to look to the landscape one. Maybe there's some landscape construction people that might be trying to figure out where they fall, but I feel like I'm just trying to understand why we would marry the two. I think there are some differences in the two. So, yeah, just trying to understand why we would do that and not just work with what we have.
It's really just a call back to the comments we received yesterday about making the documents simpler so that, you know, we could make the landscape document look more like the construction document by only having a listing of what is and is not allowed. And then you refer to a separate set of guidelines so that it's cleaner. You know, the order itself is only 1 or 2 pages, and then you have the guidelines and they're the same for everyone.
Jim?
I agree with Rita. I think the landscape people should have their own set of things to go by.
Jeff?
On the site, I know the landscaping also was going up to 4 per site on the larger lots and having that provision for 2 still on the smaller lots. That was in that section of the document.
Any other comments? I guess I would feel the same way with the, you know, most people would want to look back to their document to see where they fall, and I guess we could leave it in that phase 2 of leave those protocols in.
Okay. Are there any other comments or requested changes to this document?
Just a quick technical one. I think since we adopted construction, we adopted that as an order number 8. I think we will have to rename this one as order number 9. I think they both accidentally had order number 8 written on them.
Okay. And where do we stand on an effective date? Is this also going to be Monday, May 11th?
I would say for consistency's sake, let's just do Monday.
Rita?
I think as long as the goal for any kind of, not the reason for any kind of delay is to allow for translation. And I think at least into Spanish, maybe Portuguese, but Spanish for sure. So as long as it can be translated and that's a reasonable amount of time for that to happen for these 2 documents, then yes.
Yeah, I think that's the main reason by setting that date to give time for that. So yes,
okay, so we'll fill in an effective date of May 11th.
And or number 9. Oh, you already got it up there.
Yep. Okay, are there any other questions or comments about the landscape order?
I have a quick question. We were talking about the paperwork and the log, or we were talking about the paperwork with the construction. I know, Jeff, you've provided the select board with information on how many, permits or you've processed. I'm just wondering if there's anywhere we can be consistent with those 2 in terms of how much you're processing, whether we'll still be getting information. I mean, we'd only be getting information on it if you're still processing applications and things. So I'm a little bit unsure about where we stand with that and if there's anything that needs to change within the document to reflect that.
So if I may, I'll try to answer that. So we're still processing applications again for that kind of overall company registration that was established in emergency order number 6. As of this afternoon, we've processed 167 kind of company or single landscaper registrations with varying amounts of employees in there. But I know we're averaging about a little over 5 employees kind of per company. For what they've registered by their employee numbers. So I think we're tracking that pretty well. I know this document includes a provision for kind of a separate application process for something that's not inside the printed scope, but that someone feels is within safety, sanitation, and essential operations that we can review. So we'll be tracking those projects in that way. And other than that, and just kind of inspections and boots on the ground. That's kind of how we've been tracking all of those, and I would anticipate that remaining the same.
Anybody else have any comments? Can't tell if can't see Helene or Malcolm, but
No, I don't.
okay. Can I get a motion to accept the landscape phase 2, order number 9?
So moved.
I'll make that motion.
Can I get a second?
Second.
Okay, by roll call vote, Rita,
Aye.
Jim, Cooper, Helene Weld,
Aye.
Malcolm,
Yes.
and Chairman says yes.
Can I make a request? I am thinking about what comes next now that we've done this, and I think perhaps what would be helpful to the board, or at least I know for myself, is if the building department could provide us maybe a weekly report on how many projects they've given a go-ahead to more than 4 workers, because I feel that would help to understand, is it 8, is it 10, are we is the next move aligning ourselves with the state? And I feel like understanding what sort of requests, I hear from a lot of small builders, and I would like to know who's out there who needs the full 10 and how quickly and how big is that demand. So I'm wondering if that's something that the building department could do.
Can't see you, but Leslie or Paul want to take that?
Jeff has his hands up. Maybe they.
No.
I think Leslie and Paul may have actually dropped off the call already.
Oh, did they?
So, if I may, I know something that the town administration has asked us to do kind of since the inception of emergency orders 5 and 6 is provide kind of the EOC staff at a minimum a weekly report on how 5 and 6 are going and what's going on. So I know we've been providing that for 6. So I would imagine that being able to provide a similar report to the Board of Health should be pretty simple to do. Not to speak for them, but if you guys would like one for landscaping, I know we could simply forward our regular Friday reports.
I think that would be great, and we can run it. Hopefully, we can run it by them, Steve or Roberto, because they don't have an application process anymore. They may not be reporting the same things anymore. But so I think the only thing that'll be an application process now will be case by case basis of additional workers beyond 6. So I think that would be helpful in understanding if the next phase is aligning with the state or not.
Sure.
Also, while we're here too, which I think I brought up to Roberto earlier, was which comes under the Board of Health, is septic permits. Maybe you wanted to touch a little bit on that. I know the guys have been asking about, they had some jobs out there that were started. They had a permit and haven't gotten back to whether it was a septic or fixing a sewer connection. And I think they just want to know where they stand with this order, which now is really should come to the Board of Health.
Yes, I think moving forward, before we move forward, we already decided on landscaping, right?
Yes.
I can stop sharing my screen. Yeah. Okay. All right, now we can see everybody.
Yeah.
I think what's really important is the septic permits. Same thing. No new construction, but in the case of a failed system, including technically failed systems. So now is the time to fix technical failures. I think those will all still go to the Board of Health. I think Paul has actually been already forwarding septics to us anyway. What we're going to be looking to do is possibly start doing plan reviews for anything like that might be new, so that we don't have a backlog on the first day that we open. But as far as the septic goes, yes, please contact us. Still, same thing. We're still in the there's a back order on drop boxes. So we don't have drop boxes installed at our office yet. But once we do get a drop box, people will be able to drop off plans, things like that. In the meantime, what we are asking people to do is send it to us electronically so that we can do plan reviews and things like that. But yes, septic systems, please get that to us. That is under the governor's order, a section of sanitation.
Right. Also, well, for purposes of being on the same page, and I think we need, I'm sure we got to start looking at phase 3, and I just want more participation in the talks that should be happening probably this week, especially when the government orders will be revised or changing in the next, week and a half. I'm sure you got to start looking at phase 3, what's going to be allowed in that. And I'd like to ask somebody from the board if they're willing to be in with whoever's making those decisions with Plus or the building association and Roberto, and just so that the board is, informed, and we don't have, we're not getting stuff so late and trying to make decisions and just to make things simpler.
Phase 3 refers only to ongoing construction and landscaping?
I believe so.
Okay.
Yeah, I think, yes, that's the next step. Phase 3 is definitely the next step. I think we also need to, at the very least, wait to hear what Governor Baker is going to say next week, because that May 18th date is looming, and he may push it back even more. So we need to at least see what some of that information comes out, because we may not even have to create any new orders. We might already be in line at that point, or things might be lifted altogether.
And so, you're on the front line mostly with everybody. So I would just like to make sure make sure that the rest of the board is informed on what's going on.
Yes. So one of the big things that came out of yesterday is I'm going to get into also getting a report together to get that over to you guys as the Board of Health. I'm going to try to get that to you on a weekly basis, so that you can get these updates of the work we're doing here and what we're hearing from the state and the national boards as well.
Okay. Does anybody else have any other questions for anybody? Yeah. Colleen?
I guess, again, it's timeline, the next Board of Health meeting, where we are with restaurants. I saw there were some things listed at the select board from last night after we went off. Shellfish extension. I didn't know what the outcome of that was.
The shellfish extensions, I don't remember, Jeff. Yeah, I think. Okay.
So the shellfish extension is emergency order number 4, and that was as a result of the permit window closing at the police station. Coincided with the expiration of recreational shellfishing licenses that expired on March 31st. So to alleviate the burden on people trying to get new licenses, we simply requested that all 2019 recreational shellfishing licenses be extended until the state of emergency was lifted. So that's the purpose of number 4, so people can still go clam and gather food for themselves from our shellfishing resources.
Thank you.
Malcolm, did you?
Yeah, I found the fact, although it was at times painful, the having more public comment at our meetings as with the Board of Health. It helped me kind of formulate some of my own opinions. So if I would suggest if we could find a way to do that at our next meeting.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I think we just forgot to put up public comment again this time. That's for the next meeting. We already have the third Thursday of the month scheduled, which is May 21st.
Yeah.
So whatever Governor Baker decides to do next week, as far as the order, we already have May 21st scheduled as a regular meeting. So we can move forward on that.
Yeah. Things change every day. So a lot going on.
Yeah, I have to move on. I'd like to make a motion to adjourn.
I get a second?
Second.
All in favor by roll.
Oh, I'm missing it.
Malcolm,
Yes.